more technical expertise. Another area is designer creative requirements. Doesn't mean that we don't all potentially have some talent there, but sometimes you just want a professional to help. Another big one is you're trying to run a business. So sometimes it's just pure workload or time constraints, and you realize that really just hiring someone externally could take some of this off your plate and make sure, it's getting done and it's getting done well. Something that I also run into quite a bit is sometimes business owners have been doing things, on social media with their website, and they've been managing quite well for a while, but they realize they need some expert advice or strategy. And that could be for a number of reasons. Maybe just things aren't quite working the way you'd like, or you're just looking for, maybe you have some new goals and you need someone to help get you there. That can be a good reason. And that can be either when you're first starting out or even after you've been doing things for a while. Sometimes you just need someone to come in, help give you some advice, and then you can execute from there. That leads into the next one, which is often the reason why we call in help. And that's just because you might be doing a ton of work, but you're really not getting the results that you had hoped. So certainly a good time to call in an expert and have them help you with that. And then last but not least, maybe things are going really well, or potentially you're looking to expand your business and you really want to take things in the digital space to the next level. That can be a really good time to bring someone in to help as well. Now, in terms of the types of projects that would most commonly be hired out or that you would look for freelance help with, and these are the key areas that I've focused on when putting this together this evening. Really, website design, that's a big piece, as well as website development. Now, those could be the same people, or it could be different people. So just keep that in mind. And sometimes you might need one or the other, and sometimes you might need both. They tend to kind of go hand in hand. But if some of it is just technical problems, you might just need a developer, and that's it. So just keep those in mind that these can be together. Another key area is social media management. So maybe you're just feeling overwhelmed, or you're just looking for better results in that area. That can be something that you would look to hire someone to handle for you. Another part of that, and once again, this could go hand in hand with social media management, is content creation. So, and when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about that could just be things like blog posts, so written content. It could be video content. So those are the kind of things that sometimes you can create some of it yourself, or you might be looking for help and you might want to outsource that. So those are the key kind of 4 areas that I'm going to be talking about when we go through everything this evening. So step 1 in this whole process is really to take a step back and help lay out and determine what you actually need. So, first things first, before you even start for anyone, before you start talking to anyone who they've used, it's really useful to take a step back and review your current situation. So think a bit about, and I would actually put things down, write them out, type them up, whatever that is. It'll just help. Because also, as you go through the process, trying to find a professional, these are going to be the kind of things that if they know what they're doing, they want to know as well. So, first of all, what challenges are you experiencing? Why would you even be looking for some help? What are your key goals? So, that's going to help whoever you hire. It's going to help them focus. So, just knowing exactly what you're looking to achieve and what your goals are, it's a really important thing to button down before you start your search. What specifically do you want a professional to help you achieve? So sometimes you're looking for people, but really they need to deliver on a piece of that to help you as part of one of those things. So just making sure that that's very clear will be really helpful. And then something to also think about is what do you want to be left with once your project and their work is complete? So, and what I mean by that is sometimes just think about that and have that clear in your head before you start your search. And basically what all of these things are going to help you do, as I've kind of alluded to already, is they'll make sure that you actually are hiring the right resource. There's a lot of different digital professionals out there. So this is just going to help narrow that down. And it's also from day one, just going to establish clear expectations and desired results. So everyone's on the same page from the very beginning. Another thing that I would note is that the process itself, when you're looking for someone, generally on what tends to be a smaller scale project, some of you may have experienced or been part of, if you work for a larger corporation at some point, that they have a process called request for proposals or an RFP process, which often too there might be sites that you can, post these on or whatever that is, looking for people to apply. It's not really the way it works for smaller scale projects. So first of all, you don't need that super intensive document. And also there isn't necessarily just one place for you to go to and post this. So what I would recommend is putting together your own kind of one-pager, just to ensure that those requirements that you have are very clear. And this is so that you can communicate them very easily, but potentially too, you can just share this simple document with anyone that you're looking to quote, and then they have that very clearly defined and they're all working on the same kind of script. So what I would include in that are things like your very specific project requirements or deliverables. So what exact things do you want from them? Which skill sets are required? So, if it's a brand new website, you need a designer and a developer, which if it's brand new, you will. Are you looking for a content creator because you want some video or maybe some copy? So just making sure that you know the skill sets that are required. Also make sure that you've detailed your timelines. And that, obviously there's your end date of when you want things delivered, but also are there any milestones that you already know of that you can give to these potential people to work with? It'll just help them plan. Also the project goals, which obviously we just spoke about. So the more detail you can give them on what you're trying to achieve, the better off everyone's going to be. And then it's also really helpful to include some key performance indicators or KPIs that you're going to use to measure success. So let's say you're looking for, just more engagement on your social media channels. So maybe your KPIs aren't so much that you want more followers. Maybe what it is that you want more people to engage with your content. You want more likes, you want more shares, or maybe for a website, you want more traffic, so more visits, and more, let's say if you have an e-commerce site, more purchases. So just put down those specifics in terms of KPIs so that they know, that you know what you're talking about, and they know that you're going to be measuring the success of what they do based on these factors. It's just really good to be as detailed and upfront as possible with all of this. So, this is a really big topic, and I'm going to tell everyone right now, because the biggest question is in terms of budget, when setting a realistic budget, everyone just tends to want to tell us a bit about their project and then have us help give you a number. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's just impossible for us to do that. There's too many factors, and we would hate to give you a number that's not right. So we're not going to be able to necessarily give you, here's what your project budget range should be. But what I am going to do is just do some level setting with you so that you have a bit of a better sense of what's out there, how can you evaluate this, just some background information. The challenge in this space is truly that every project and every digital services professional is different. professionals for sure have varying degrees of experience and abilities. Some are going to be able to do more than one thing for you. Some will specialize only in one area. They could be someone who's just been doing this a couple of years, or someone like, Livy and I, who have probably been doing this for 15 plus years. So that is going to range greatly. And that's something that, just like when I mentioned that whole contractor and renovations thing, it's the same scenario. So you just need to be aware that you have to get some insight into that and then judge things accordingly. Also, projects really have varying degrees of complexity. So someone can say, what should my website cost? But there's so many factors in your website versus somebody else's, it's nearly impossible for me to even just give you a range. And that's why these last steps that I gave you before we started talking about budget, the more detailed you are in those, the better someone can quote you. Because they're going to have all the details they need before they give you a quote, and that should be as accurate as humanly possible. And it's also just really good to keep in mind that your project might require more than one person or skill set. So sometimes someone will either need to team up with someone else, or maybe you need to hire two different professionals. It really depends on what your project requires. And just so that you know, and I know this doesn't make things easier, but rates truly vary between professionals. It honestly could be anything from right around minimum wage, potentially if someone, everyone's got a friend who's got a daughter or son that took digital marketing or took a course or whatever. That could be the scenario. Doesn't mean they couldn't be great, but that range can go all the way up to $150 plus an hour. Let's say if you're working with someone who's either been doing this a really, really long time, or maybe if you have a few things you need done and you go and potentially look at working with a small digital agency. Hourly fees can very easily be in that range. And then there's lots of people across that spectrum and somewhere in the middle. Once again, doesn't mean that you have to go 150 plus an hour to get someone really great. You just need to make sure you can ask a lot of questions, learn about their experience, and then make sure that you have a realistic budget range in mind. And just like, what is your ceiling, right? You need to know, just like any other project in your life, here's how much I'm willing to spend. And then make sure that you can find someone that aligns within that. And just so that you're aware, generally professionals will quote any sort of project that you have in one of two ways. And that might be that they just give you an hourly rate and then they track their hours and then bill you either regularly, or they may, especially if you have a discrete project, they may just bill or quote you on a project basis. So, and I'm going to break this down a little bit more, just so that you have some insight into what the norms are. So, first of all, I've just kind of broken this, and this is included for you on the PDF, because I know this will be important going forward. Just kind of broken out the types of things you should be aware of if someone's quoting you hourly. And sometimes that could still be like a retainer, but based on an hourly rate, or if they're billing you full project. So on the hourly rate side, the things that they should make clear for you is roughly how long is this project expected to take. So if they're going to tell you that they're billing hourly and they've asked a bunch of questions, you've answered everything they needed, they should be able to estimate how many hours they expect this is going to take. Now, if it's a retainer, like an ongoing, let's say someone's helping you with social media and they're going to bill hourly, they should still be able to give you a rough estimate of, say, like weekly, it's going to be this many hours, or monthly, it's going to be this many hours. So, and that may change a little bit over time, but that should be a discussion that continues to happen, and you should never be surprised. Also, very important that you talk about what happens if it's necessary to go beyond that expected number of hours. never be surprised once again, and nothing should ever go ahead without your okay first. So just make sure that that's been spoken about and everyone's on the same page. Also, make sure that you are very much aware of how that kind of hours to date will be communicated on an ongoing basis so that you know exactly where you stand and sort of how much is left based on what they estimated at the beginning. And then it's also really important just to know how that's going to be built. So is it that every 2 weeks they're going to send you an invoice for the previous 2 weeks of work? Is it monthly? Just what does that look like so everyone's on the same page from day one? The more clear you are up front, the less awkward this will get along the way. So it's better to just have these conversations out in the open at the very beginning, and then no one will feel weird as things come up along the way. Now, in terms of if someone gives you a project-based quote, then what I would suggest that you make sure is that they have a very detailed scope of work for you so that you know exactly what is included in that quote and what is not. And that should be something they should be very comfortable and familiar with, a really detailed list along with the number for the project and what it's going to cost. Also, again, sometimes even if you've agreed to everything, the scope of work is great, something will come up. Maybe you've got a really great idea or they see an opportunity for you to capitalize on, but it's going to take a few more hours. If that kind of stuff comes up, how will that be handled? And once again, they should always make you feel comfortable in knowing they'll never proceed without your okay first. Anyone that's above board, we all want to be on the same page, so that should be something that they're upfront about. And then once again, how is it going to be billed? Often it's in some sort of payment, so maybe there's an upfront payment, and then one at the very end, or maybe it'll be billed in sort of milestone increments. Just make sure that everyone's on the same page and that you're well aware of how that's going to be broken out and built. So also just wanted to give you a sense of how projects would typically be billed. I do want to say this is just a guideline. Every professional can be a little bit different, and maybe they like to work things a little bit differently. Doesn't mean that it's wrong, as long as you feel comfortable with it and they're upfront with it. This is just kind of standard. So in terms of an hourly rate or retainer, generally something like social media management would fall under this, because it isn't just a discrete project and it's ongoing work. So generally what they would do is say, here's my hourly rate. I estimate it's going to take this many hours, weekly, monthly, whatever that is. And this is how often I'll be invoicing. Content creation. So this sometimes can be project-based, but let's say you have someone writing a blog for you regularly. Often that will either be an hourly rate or like a retainer. Also, something like ongoing website maintenance or management, if you have someone helping you with that, I can almost guarantee they will likely do some sort of retainer, or they'll just say, listen, if you need my help every now and then, I'll track my time and I'll bill you once we've accrued like a couple of hours or whatever. And just to be aware, some people will charge in sort of 15-minute or 30-minute or hour-long increments, so just make sure that you're aware of that. I don't love that hour scenario, just because you don't want to feel like you have to save up an hour's worth of work to get things done. So just be aware, be upfront, talk with whoever you're working, especially if you're going to be working with them ongoing, and just make sure that you're both comfortable with the arrangement. Then on the project side of things, usually things like website design and development often will be project-based fees. Now, some people might still do hourly, but for the most part, if we have enough information from someone, it means I can estimate how many hours it'll take, and then I'll just give a simple project-based fee, and I will include all the details of what that includes as well. For one-off content creations, what I mean by that is sometimes you want someone to help you with, maybe it's like a larger scale video project, and you say, listen, I want you to go out and create 5 different videos for me, each with a different topic or whatever it is. You both figure out the details and they say, okay, the whole series of videos is going to cost this much. And then you can work on, delivery dates and all of that stuff too, but often that would be a single project fee. And then for something like a social media strategy or an overall digital strategy, that often would be a project fee as well. That's something that we partner with you to figure it all out, document it all, maybe give you some plans for the first month or two, and then hand it off to you to continue to execute. So that would tend to be a discrete project. So that, like I said, this is just a guideline. It might be a little bit different, and as long as you're comfortable with it and it makes sense to you, it doesn't mean if it falls kind of differently from this that it's necessarily wrong. Just make sure you know all the details up front. Anything with money, the more you can talk about up front, the better off you're going to be, because it just will avoid issues later. So, some overall tips of just kind of how to figure out what the range should be, what's reasonable. The first thing I would advise is talk to other business owners you trust. Do some research on rates or quotes that maybe they got on their projects, and do that ahead of time, just so that you already have a reasonable sense in your mind of what this might cost. I think sometimes the biggest challenge is the disconnect between what, the small business owner is expecting things to cost and maybe what they actually cost on the digital professional side. So just making sure you've done a little bit of research up front will help you budget properly. And once again, you also have to do this based on what's available and realistic for you. So you also have to be aware that if your budget is smaller, probably not going to be able to afford that 150 plus an hour agency, but it doesn't mean you can't find somebody good for a more reasonable price. There's definitely lots of options out there. One thing to keep in mind though is that cheaper isn't always the best way to go. Sometimes working with someone that costs a little bit more, maybe they're $50 or $75 an hour, but it's only going to take them a couple of hours, and you're getting someone who's seasoned and really knows their stuff. Sometimes that can be more cost effective and productive than hiring someone who's really new to this and is kind of learning a bit as they go. So just keep that in mind as well. And what can often be helpful is just try and get a range of quotes. Talk to some people that have different levels of experience. Ask all the questions I'm going to give you to share, and then see who really feels like the best fit to you. Because maybe you're okay with investing some time in someone who's a little bit newer, but you're going to work with them for a while. That might be okay. But sometimes you just want someone to come in, spend a couple hours, get things done, and that ends up actually saving you money and effort. Also, if you're planning to work with someone on an ongoing basis, do not hesitate to ask about whether they provide discounts for longer-term agreements. A lot of us will do that. If we know something like, social media management or something ongoing, if we know you basically are in this for 6 months or a year, that saves us from trying to find a whole bunch of other new clients to fill a gap. So sometimes people will provide a small discount. Doesn't hurt to ask. Be as tactful as you can when you do, but certainly it's a pretty common practice. So no one should really be surprised by that. And some may actually just offer that up as well. Always ensure that you're aware of specific billing terms up front. So I've brought this up more than once. How are they going to invoice? How often? What are their payment terms? All of that nitty-gritty detail stuff, just make sure that you're aware of it from day one. All right, so that is all the information. Hopefully gives you guys enough to think about and gives you a little bit more clarity on the budget, even if I can't give you exact numbers. But if you think of anything and there's some extra time at the end, we can also talk a little bit more of that area. So you've figured out, what you really need, roughly what your budget is, let's talk a little bit about physically how do you go about finding these magical unicorns. So this is what I would recommend. And there's a bunch of different options here, and you may want to try more than one of these. But first step, always ask people that you know and trust for direct recommendations. So other business owners you know, people that work in this industry or something related to this industry, anyone that you know will give you trusted, truthful recommendations, that's always a good first step. Then another thing I highly recommend is do some research on other local small to medium business owners who you really like what they're doing. So maybe you're looking for some help on social media and you realize there's a couple businesses in the neighborhood you are in and you love their stuff. Now, they might be doing it themselves, but it doesn't hurt to reach out and say, listen, do you have someone helping you with this? I really love what you're doing. Could you introduce me? Do you have any recommendations? Like, it's a really powerful tool to kind of team up with other small business owners who are working with people that, they probably also enjoy what they're doing. So, and as someone who's a digital services professional, if I could find a bunch of people locally, like-minded business owners, and work with all of them, that's a win-win for everyone. So that's a really helpful tool. And normally most of us are really happy to recommend to others, so I wouldn't be shy about taking this step. Another thing that can be really helpful is to search and post in local social media groups. So there's lots of Facebook groups for specific neighborhoods. It can be a really helpful tool because you may also just find, people like me who are trying to find some new clients and will reach out directly. You'll also get some recommendations from people who have worked with someone specifically. And I would ask for that, like ask people to post or to recommend someone they've worked with directly and they really loved. It can be a really great source of help and just a place to start if you've struck out elsewhere. Another place to check out is Digital Main Street has a vendor directory. So they have a bit of a system for people to sign up, and they have to go through at least a few hoops to land in that directory. So at least there's a bit of vetting that's happened there. You're still going to want to go through all the steps I'm about to talk about, but that can be a good starting place. And then there's also freelancer marketplaces. So a couple of years ago, I probably wouldn't have necessarily recommended them, but they've come a long way. So there's Upwork and there's also Fiverr. A lot of the people working on those platforms, the professionals, have tons of reviews, have been working, and taking on projects through Upwork and Fiverr for years. So at least there's some good history there. And you can read through a bunch of reviews and at least kind of narrow down your choices. It also is the kind of platform where you can actually just post whatever it is you need done and people will submit their proposals to you. So depending on what you need, that can be another option as well. So I have a quick question. I'm going to pause and read and answer this. So the question is it better to have a social media freelancer sign up my Facebook and Twitter and give me access? Or is it better for me to sign up and give the freelancer access to post on my behalf? Super easy question. Always sign up for the accounts yourself. So you want to be the owner of those accounts whenever humanly possible. And specifically for Facebook, what you need to do is through your personal Facebook account, you'll have to set up a page and then you can give them access, which is the best case scenario. So some of the platforms don't really allow for that. You're going to have to share a username and password. But Facebook is actually really great because what you can do is just assign somebody as an admin, which also means you have the power to revoke that at any time. So if at all possible, you should retain ownership as much as possible, just so that no one does anything shady or locks you out or something goes wrong. You always have control. And the good thing is, even if you're sharing a username or password, if it's set up with your email address as the default, if that has to be reset, then they can't just sometimes there are shady people, and you would hate for someone to be able to steal that out from under you. So 100% always, anything, you should set up as much as possible, own it, and then give them access. This way, too, you control how much access they have as well. So, just a couple tips here. I would highly recommend that, just like if you were looking to hire someone to work in a restaurant or in a store or whatever it is, you find at least 3 professionals to interview and give you quotes. You may want to go up to 5, depending on what you're looking for. More isn't always better, so I wouldn't necessarily go too much beyond that, because it might just feel overwhelming. But if you've got a good pool to choose from, narrow it down to those 3 to 5, get them to quote, and then you can, make your final decision based on both the interview and the quote itself. I would also, if possible, seek out and read reviews, but more important than reviews, if you can, speak directly to other clients of the people that you've narrowed it down to. Another thing you can also do is check with your BIA or your economic development office. Sometimes they'll have listings of local vendors as well. Usually, once again, those would be people that have been vetted in some way, shape, or form. So it's just always helpful to have, as much information about these people before you make your final decision. So just some things, like treat it like, as if you were hiring a full-time person. This person's going to be an extension of your digital face to the world. So you want to make sure that you're comfortable with them as humanly possible. A few more things. Yes. Request references. And when you ask for references, I would basically ask them to provide references for projects that closely align with yours, if possible. So just things that are similar in scope, similar in nature, just because it'll be a little bit better comparison for you when you call those references. Another thing, when you actually contact those references, so there's kind of all the usual questions you're going to ask about: did they deliver on time? Did they deliver what they said? But you also just want to find out what the experience was. Did they enjoy it? Are they working with them? Those are usually good signs, right? Like if someone makes a joke about you not wanting to steal their freelancer away, you probably want to steal their freelancer away. And hopefully they can just work for both of you, but that's obviously a pretty good sign. And also something to think about, and this kind of goes back to that Fiverr and Upwork thing. Obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic still, so things are a little bit different. But as that hopefully someday soonish starts to shift, you need to think about whether you're okay working completely remotely with this person, or if you'd be a little more comfortable once it's all safe and we're all good to do so again. If you do want some in-person time, that's going to help you decide, do you find someone on Upwork or Fiverr that could be located absolutely anywhere? Or do you want to go a little more local so that when it's safe to do so, you could go and have coffee and sit down and talk about results with this person or whatever that is. And certainly for someone that you're working with ongoing, for something like social media, that might really be something that you want. You might want a little face-to-face time every now and then. So just keep that in mind too. Doesn't mean that you couldn't find someone on Fiverr or Upwork that's local, but it's going to be a little bit more challenging there. So now we're going to take a little break before I get into all the questions you're going to ask these people, and we're going to give away a couple of ebooks. So basically, really great book. If you haven't heard about it or seen it or read it, the founder of Camp Tech, Avery Swartz, wrote a really great book, See You on the Internet, which I also own. It's a really helpful book just for all things digital marketing for small business owners. So Libby is going to randomly pick a couple people, and you will get your very own ebook copy. For anyone who doesn't win, I'm really sorry, but you might want to check out this book anyway. It really is a helpful tool, and it's been written with small business owners in mind, so it's very like easy to understand. It's in very kind of palatable chunks. It's really, really useful. It was even useful for me, right? It's helpful to learn from other kind of digital marketers. So I will let Olivia handle that fun, and I'm going to move on to 10 questions to ask, exclamation. And the way that I've framed these 10 questions, these are good for everybody. So whether it's a designer, developer, content creator, these are kind of general, and then you'll see that I've added some bonus questions that are a little bit more specific. So I'll go through these 10 first, and then I'll go through the bonus ones. So first of all, things that you're going to want to know for sure. How long has this person been in business? That should just help give you a little bit of a sense of how much experience they have, what their rates potentially could be as you do a little more research and learn a little bit more. That'll just give you some level setting. Obviously, you'll want to know what's their area of expertise. I can tell you that a lot of digital service professionals have more than one. Lots of us are kind of jacks of all trades, or jills of all trades, whatever. So it's just helpful to know, because that leads into number 3, which is just finding out what other skills they might bring to the table. Might just mean if you might only have a specific project for them now, but if you really like working with them, potentially that means they can take on some other stuff for you in the future. Also, this one's really important because this actually happens quite a bit. I actually do this all the time. Do you work on your own, or will you be subcontracting any of the work? So this happens lots. Doesn't mean it's shady or wrong. It just, someone should be very upfront about it. So for me, I work on WordPress websites for people all the time, usually just using one of a few different themes that I know are really good. I'm great with layouts and user experience and kind of setting up content and all of that. But what I am not is a developer. So I will team up all the time with one of 2 people that are really great developers. And what that means is, for setting up all the technical pieces of the site at the beginning and the hosting and all of that, they are fast. If I did it, it would take longer, which means it's going to cost you more. So I work with somebody else to do that. Also, when you're working with things like themes, lots of times you need to do some custom coding. I am not good at that. So I work with somebody else to do that piece. Now, what I will do is I'll tell whoever might want to work with me exactly that. I will explain how it's going to work, but that I will manage everything. They can meet this subcontractor, whose name is usually either Alex or Todd. They can meet them or not, whatever they feel comfortable with. So, and often, the 3 of us kind of become a team. The client, whichever developer I'm working with, and me, and we all kind of talk some things out together, right? So it's just all very upfront, but once again, they should be very transparent about that with you, and you should know all the details. And if I were you, I would ask to meet any of these subcontractors as well. It's just good for you to know who is on the other side of this work. I would definitely also find out what's their process for managing the project. So just how is all of that going to work, so that you can feel comfortable that it aligns with how you would want that to flow. Also, I would ask how they manage approvals and revisions. So just making sure that it's very clear, if they're going to create something, so something like social media, are they going to write a bunch of posts for you? You get a couple days to approve or give any comments. They do a round of revisions. You get to look at it one more time. Then it goes live. The flow might be different than that, but you just want to know that from day one. Same with things like websites. How many rounds of design revisions do you get? Is it 1, 2, or 3, so that everyone knows? And that means if you want more than that, it's probably going to cost you more than the quote. But everyone knows that from day one. So anyone that's been doing this a while will have a very clear process for this, and they'll be able to share that. Also, how do they communicate updates and progress throughout the project? So is it regular check-ins? Are they going to send you an email once a week with any updates? Do you do a call for every milestone? When they send you something for approvals, do they want to talk through it? Just all of those kinds of things. How is that communication going to work so that you know from day one what to expect? Also, how do they deal with anything that's outside of the agreed upon scope? Once again, it should just say, we're going to have a conversation, and then I will not do anything until you've given me the go-ahead. That's pretty much the standard. Anyone that tells you anything different, I might be a little worried. Really important one, which seems a little bit silly, but it's important. When are you available to start? You just want to know that based on the timelines you have, that they actually have availability. That is the one thing that you will start to potentially find. The people that are really good can be very busy. So if you've got something that you need done right away, you just want to make sure that you have someone with immediate availability. And then the final question, just how do you deal with any maintenance or issues that might come up after the project is complete? So this might not be quite as relevant for social. The way I would phrase it for social is, just asking them about how they're going to deal with if questions come in or people make comments on posts they do, so that you have clarity about how that's going to work. Things like websites, it's just, are they going to help you? If there's ongoing maintenance, will they be available to you? Is it then an hourly rate? They should have kind of detailed options for you. And just one before I get into, there's a question that Livy's given me, but also the bonus questions. I just want to make sure, and it's bolded for a reason, please make sure you ask for references and actually do call them. Like, even if the meeting goes amazingly and you think the person is just incredible, just make sure you do that double check and speak to a couple of people just to make sure it's actually true. Some people are just really good at telling people what they think they want to hear, and I don't want you to get caught out. So just please make sure you do and call more than one. So in terms of, there's a question here about teaming up with subcontractors. So when you team up with subcontractors, how do you manage paying them? Do you take their rate and add a percent to it and pass the total cost on to the client? So generally what I'll do is usually I'd be working with a subcontractor for something that I'm quoting a project fee. So what I would do is I'll have a separate meeting, or I potentially would even bring the subcontractor to the initial kind of discovery meeting, let them, we talk through kind of what that workload and workflow is going to look like. They would figure out how many hours they're going to need for their piece. I would figure out how many hours I'm going to need for my piece. We don't always have the same hourly rate, so I would just kind of add all of that together and then quote the client a overall project rate. Now, in terms of, do people tend to lump that up and add like a finder's fee or something? I can tell you I don't. But really, in the grand scheme, that isn't something that that anyone would share with a client. That's really kind of an agreement between subcontractor and the main contractor. But some people do that, some people don't. As long as that rate seems reasonable to you and covers off everything, then it shouldn't be so big that you're like, wow, what is this number? Because if it's coming down to that, then you may just want to look at also agencies who just have like a blended rate, hourly fee, that kind of thing. You know exactly what's what. But yeah, certainly some people who subcontract out some work would add a percentage on top, some don't. So, and once again, that piece, I would say, doesn't necessarily need to be transparent to the client. It's really just about giving them what they're going to pay. Okay, bonus questions. So these are specifically for web professionals. And this would be basically designer or developer, especially if you're getting like a whole website designed or redesign or something like that. You're just going to you'll want to know exactly what skills that person has, or if they're teaming up with someone else, or if they can do it. Because there are people that can actually design and do the development too. They are awesome. Love those people. When they're good at what they do, of course. So first, one of the first things to find out is just what content management system or systems, otherwise known as a CMS, do they use? So are they clearly like, they work on WordPress? So for me, I focus on WordPress. If someone really wanted a killer Shopify site, I wouldn't be their girl. So I would either, if I knew someone, I'd recommend them to someone who was, or I would just let them know that that's not my area of expertise and that they should find somebody else. Some people know more than one very well as well. So just find out, make sure it aligns with whatever CMS you want to use. You may not also necessarily know that. It means you should be able to talk that through with this person as well, and they should be able to make recommendations for you. Because even if I'm not a Shopify person, I can tell you, if all you want is a really like solid e-commerce, great will let people buy things as quickly as possible. If you came to me and said, hey Nicole, would love to maybe work with you, here's what I need, let's talk about this, the first thing I would say is, I am not your person. You should probably work on Shopify. And your first step should be to go out there and just make sure that you're looking for someone who's a Shopify kind of designer, developer. Things like that. So just make sure. Once again, this person may know more than one of them. Also, just ask them how proficient they are at making changes to CMS templates or themes. Often there's customization needed, even when people are using templates or themes, so you just want to make sure that they are comfortable doing that and have done plenty of it in the past. Also, we've talked about this quite a bit already, do you need any extra help, or will you be able to handle both design and development? Once again, if you're not sure if them handling both means it's them by themselves or them and a subcontractor, just ask. They should be upfront about it, but it doesn't hurt to ask if you're not quite sure about their answer. And then something that's also important and sometimes gets overlooked in the kind of interviewing process is, how do they do their testing before they launch a new website? So what's their plan with that? And it sounds like something small, but also depending on how complex your website is, you really want someone who's done this before, knows that they're going to go through every page, test every form, make sure it works in all the browsers. Like, they should be able to walk you through that. And it's just something that I often find gets a bit forgotten. So those are my bonus questions for you, for the web people out there. Now, for social media professionals, really important just to find out what tools they use to plan and deploy their social posts. So it might just be that someone is using, a good old calendar in Excel, and they post directly through each social media platform. That can actually be okay, and sometimes it works out better because algorithms tend to favor posts that come directly within the platforms. So it could be that, or if someone is managing a whole lot of social channels, they may also use a tool, right? So it could be something like Hootsuite or Sprout Social, or there's like a ton of them. Those two are the ones I've worked with the most. So just find out what they're doing behind the scenes to make sure that you have a line of sight to that. Also, find out if they create all of the content, and that's the copy, the photos, and the video themselves. Once again, you just want a line of sight to, okay, is this person a great copywriter, but really they're having someone else take the photos, and somebody else is doing the video, and who owns all that, and who signed the contract, and just all of those pieces. So just make sure that you know that. Most social media professionals should be able to do all of those things for you themselves. You just want to know that that's the case. And I would say if that isn't, just make sure whatever service contract you have covers off subcontractors as well. I would ask them how they monitor competitors. So just what does that look like for them so that you can make sure that this person is looking out for that on your behalf. And it might be that you want to have a bit of a conversation about those competitors too, to give them some ideas and hopefully have them come back with some ideas for you too. Also, as part of your service, just ask them if they will respond to comments, messages, all of that, and what's their turnaround time. So that isn't always included up front. So you just want to make sure that you know, and then come to an agreement amongst yourselves that everyone's happy with. And then you just want to make sure if they've promised a certain turnaround time that you're kind of monitoring and they're living up to that. Because that's the worst. Things like messages as a business page, you want people to respond as quickly as possible. So you might also want to put something in place where you guys cover each other off or something like that as well. Also important, just how do they track and report results back? So I think that sometimes this piece gets lost and people are just happy they have someone doing it for them, but they're not necessarily on top of what those results are. But that is really, really important. Not only should they be taking this off your plate, but they should be doing such a good job that your results are definitely noticeably improving. And it does take time. It's not always immediate, but you should definitely see improvements and they should be able to show you that. Now, content creation professionals. So again, do you create all of the content, copy, photos, videos yourself, or are there others involved? So this can be a little bit different. So if you're hiring someone to do web blog for you, they should be able to do all the pieces themselves. However, let's say they're providing photos for you. Make sure they have the rights to those photos. If they're using some sort of a service for that, they need to make sure that you keep ownership of those rights, even if you guys part ways. So I just make sure you ask those questions and that you're well aware. And for something like that, it might just be, maybe they're using a tool like Canva and they have a pro account. So those photos are available to the person with the pro account. But let's say you stop working with them at some point. Technically, that means the photos that are on your site don't really belong to you anymore. So what you might want to do is say, okay, I will pay for a Canva account. You'll keep that Canva account, which means you'll always have that tool and access to some library photos and that kind of stuff. And they can use it under your account. So there's just things you can do to make sure that you're covered off. It's just good to have those conversations up front. And they may already have a plan in place for this as well, if it's something they do all the time, which they should. But also, if you're going to have someone do video for you and it's more of a big production, they may need to hire people. So people have hired me for video content many times. Usually the projects are a little bit bigger. I produce and direct. I write if there's writing necessary, but then I will hire someone to shoot it and someone to edit it. And then I handle all the other pieces. So once again, I'd be very upfront. Everyone knows if they want to meet anyone, they can. And I handle all the billing and all the management of everything. And it usually means that the people I hire give me the Nicole rate, and I pass that on to the client as well, so they save money in the mix too. I would also just ask about how they research and plan their content ideas, just so that you can get a sense of their overall kind of creative process and how they're looking at what else is out there and trying to make sure that you're playing in the mix and you can, hopefully be very competitive in whatever space that you're in. Also, what's the process for developing content or concepts, and getting your approval? So just, are they going to come back, pitch you a whole bunch of concepts, you're going to narrow that down, approve it, and let them run with it? Just how does that work overall? And if they're just handing content over to you, so sometimes what you might want to do is hire someone to just pre-create a whole bunch of content. And then what I would do is just ask them also if they'll provide some recommendations for how to roll that out and get the most out of it. So maybe it's also, if you're having someone work on some videos, they can create a couple different versions. Maybe there's like a little teaser version that goes out on social first, gets people excited, and then there's the full version that you roll out a couple days later, like things like that. It will also just give you the most bang for your buck. So yeah, those are all the bonus questions. Also, they are in the PDF for you, so you don't have to be scribbling or remembering. And basically, if you're hiring someone to do more than one of these things, I would sort of ask all of those 10 questions. Any of the questions you might have as well. And then I would just kind of add the bonus ones that are applicable too. So now, I'm going to talk a little bit about service contracts. So this is a piece that often gets forgotten, or not all of us do them. I have been guilty of that as well. But I do highly, highly, highly recommend, if at all possible, that you do have a contract in place. Whatever that is, even if it's something a little more simple in an email. Yeah, it's really important. It's just going to keep everything, keep everyone on track and keep them accountable. So you know as well, you might be working with a digital services professional that has their own contract. So it can be provided by you or it can be provided by them. But it should, no matter who it's coming from, include all the kind of areas I've detailed here. So first of all, there should be specifics on deliverables. Sometimes that'll come as like a schedule at the end, very detailed. Here's exactly what's agreed to in terms of deliverables and service. Obviously, there should be the price and the payment terms. So, how often are you getting an invoice and for how much of the project amount? Or if it's an ongoing or hourly, what does that look like? I would also include at least top-line timelines for everything. So generally with this, while it might not be the nitty-gritty details of, a really detailed project timeline, it could just be milestones and then final delivery. But I would definitely include that. I would include, or make sure they've included, details for the approval process and the number of allowable revisions so that everyone can be held to that. This one's an important one, and often it can be forgotten. It's really important to make sure that there's an intellectual property clause that basically says that the final product is owned by you. So whatever it is they're doing for you, and this should cover off things like if they're including photos or that kind of stuff, that they have to make sure that all of that is free and clear and that you own it when they hand it over. It's also things like, websites. There are companies out there that kind of build this on proprietary software, but that would often mean you don't actually own the code. And that's a terrible thing, because if you decide you're not happy with them, they own it, and you basically can't have somebody else just take the code and fix it and change it and do whatever. So you just want to make sure that there's something in there that makes it abundantly clear that you own everything they produce for you. And then there should also be some sort of termination clause. So sometimes life happens and things need to end sooner than maybe you expected. You just want to make sure that there's an out of some sort. And sometimes that'll be geared towards one party or the other. I tend to like to make sure that it's for both. Some key tips. So always highly recommend that you have your contract either drafted or reviewed by a legal professional if at all possible. So you might just want to make sure that you find, a small employment legal firm, and they can review your contract for you or can provide you with one that you can use. I would also keep in mind that if you're using the contract and it was drafted by the actual digital services professional, it's usually crafted in their favor, not yours. So keep that in mind. Obviously, whoever has gone through the trouble and the effort of, likely having a lawyer create and review a contract, it's going to be drafted in favor of them, not you. So doesn't mean you can't go back and negotiate what that contract says, but just keep that in mind. And in terms of negotiation, this is the time. So when you're looking through this and you're doing any sort of back and forth, talk it through. Make sure you ask as many questions as you need. And if anything feels off, that might be a sign that this isn't the right person or the right fit. But this definitely is the time to make that decision and ask all your questions. They shouldn't make you feel dumb or uncomfortable for asking anything, because this really should cover everyone off. Now, I know not everyone will have a proper, legally approved contract, even though I don't recommend that. But if nothing else, things should be documented in writing. It is always better than nothing. So even if it's kind of initial stages of something or just make sure that stuff is in writing. So even if you've had a call, follow up with something saying, just to confirm, this is what we spoke about, here's all the points that we agreed to. At least if that's in writing, it's something that could be defensible. Hopefully you never have to get to that stage, but it's better safe than sorry. And then also just make sure, this is really important. So there's actually a link in the PDF for just like a top line kind of boilerplate starting point contract. It's Mars, but even that one is kind of missing some pieces. Just wanted to give you something to at least look at, have an idea of what this might look like. But keep in mind that if you go online, lots of people do this. They'll just be like, listen, I'm just going to go online. They've got to be half decent. People have done this before. You need to make sure that it's applicable to where you operate your business. So everyone here should likely be located in Ontario. Make sure your contract is applicable to Ontario law. Just because that could get messy in the end if you've taken it somewhere online, you don't realize that it's somewhere else in Canada or even another country and the law isn't the same. So just something to be aware of. Once again, it's why I highly recommend going to a legal professional if at all possible. Might be money up front, but could definitely save you money in the end if something goes wrong. All right, so contract stuff. You've taken all the steps I've given you so far. Found someone, they're amazing, and you're ready to get started. Just want to give you some tips, and this just comes from years of experience being both someone hiring freelancers and being one myself. It really is a two-way relationship, so wanted to make sure I give you some tips to make sure you can get the most out of this. And a lot of this I've kind of either alluded to or spoken about already, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate the key things. So 100%, the most important thing is just clear and open communication across the board. A lot of these fall under that. But make sure there's a clear process for that ongoing communication so that you always feel confident that things are moving forward and you know exactly where they are. That's the worst feeling. I feel awful when I talk with clients who have worked with somebody else and they just say, I just always felt like I was in the dark. Like I was paying for something and I didn't even know what was happening or how things were moving forward or how things were looking. You never want to feel that way. So just make sure from day one, if you're working with someone who's done this a while, they will establish that for you anyway, and they'll let you know. But if you don't feel like you're getting that from them, I would just say, I want to make sure that I know exactly how things are going and where we're at. So maybe we could do just like a weekly quick touch base or whatever that is. Just make sure that that's abundantly clear across the board and they know what you want. You're paying them. So that's okay for you to want regular updates. And they should be more than happy to provide that. Also, if you have hard deadlines, just make sure that they're communicated from day one. And I would also just consider padding them a little bit just to be safe. Things sometimes go a bit sideways. Maybe if you're working on a website, there's some buggy something in a browser, or like there's always little things. So just make sure you give yourself a little padding. Don't let them know that necessarily, but that'll just give you peace of mind that for sure this thing will be, whatever it is, will be done on time for you. I would also make sure you have a clear understanding of any project management software or tools and how to use them. So this might be part of the ongoing communication or updates. Sometimes, depending on who you're working with, they'll actually use some software for this so that you know exactly where your project stands, what the updates are, what the progress is. So you just want to make sure if they are using a tool like that they give you a little bit of training, you're comfortable using it, you know how to check in, you know that if they need you to feed in or approve things within the software, that you know how to do that, just all of those things. Also, very important, have a clear plan for what happens when the project is complete. So if there's any ongoing work or maintenance, or let's say something goes wrong, or there's some sort of weird challenge that you didn't expect 3 weeks after this project is done, make sure that you know, can you reach out to this person? Are they open to that? They may just say, like, listen, for the first week, whatever you need, it's all included. Anything above and beyond that, I'm just going to track my time. And once we've, racked up a couple hours, I'll send you an invoice. So just make sure that everyone's clear, you feel comfortable, and you're both on the same page. If you're going to be taking on the day-to-day management after something's complete, I would just make sure that there's some training included if it's needed. It might not be needed for everything, but so for something like websites, I do WordPress all the time. I make sure I'm choosing something that's easy for the clients I work with to update themselves. That is my ultimate goal, is to create them something lovely. They love it. It meets all their needs. But if they want to go in and just tweak a little bit of copy or add their own blog post, I want them to be able to do that. That's not my ideal. Spending my day doing website updates for people is not really my ideal scenario. However, you should know there's a lot of people that build their entire business model on making money off making people come back for the tiniest things. So you just want to make sure you know that if someone is like me and they are happy to hand it off to you and that's what you want, that they maybe set an hour aside of training that's included so you can feel comfortable that you know how to do everything. And then I would also just make sure, like, if you have some questions now and then, can you reach out to that person by email? Also, just make sure, I've mentioned this several times because it is something that happens all the time, just make sure you have a plan in place for anything that comes up that's out of the scope. And this is often something that, clients realize they want something new, or they want to take something in a different direction, but the digital services professional is like, this is what we agreed on. That is out of scope, so how are you going to manage those kinds of things? And this is something that I kind of mentioned this coming into this section, just always remember this does take two. For a lot of these types of services, they're going to need you to weigh in on things regularly. They're going to need your approval on things regularly. So it's really important that you stay engaged in the process, and if there's deadlines for you, that you stick to those as well. Because if you're late, they have to scramble. That might make them late, right? And no one wants that in the grand scheme. It doesn't make anyone happy. So it's always just remembering that this is a partnership. If you've landed someone who's great and you are also great, you're going to want to work on these things as partners. So just keep in mind that they need you as much as you need them throughout this process to keep things running smoothly and to make sure that you're happy, right? Like, they don't want to go too far down the road and then you look at whatever it is they've been working on and you hate it, right? So that's why those regular check-ins and just making sure you stay engaged is really important. Now, some more red flags to watch out for. I've kind of mentioned some things along the way because this kind of stuff really gets under my skin. But I just wanted to very clearly detail some stuff that I've come across along the way when I've been hiring freelancers, or when I work with clients and they tell me horror stories about others that they've worked with or come across along the way. So, first of all, if someone isn't completely transparent and open to discussing their process, who else might be involved, if they're being a bit cagey about all of that, 100% red flag. It's definitely a worry. It's never a terrible thing to work with subcontractors unless someone is truly, just being shady and charging people crazy amounts of money and just farming out work to people who are really junior. That's generally the only time that subcontracting is just terrible. Most of us, we subcontract because we know someone that has, for a certain skill set in a project, they're better at that than we are, or we just don't even have that skill, right? So that happens very often. But if they're not transparent about it, it's probably the other scenario, that they're just raking in a ton of money and offloading the actual work to someone who generally tends to be really junior and quite cheap. So that is generally the only scenario where people are going to be super secretive about it and act cagey. All of the questions that I gave you, if they struggle to answer basically any of those questions, and they don't have many or any questions for you about the project, your expectations, your goals, what you're trying to achieve, ultimately what's going to make you happy in the end, if they don't ask a bunch of that, or it doesn't kind of come up in your conversation and they probe a little and talk a bit more about it, if they don't try and get as much detail from you as possible and they struggle to answer any of those questions, chances are they don't have a ton of experience doing this, or they're really not who I would consider a professional. So that is like a massive, massive, massive red flag to me. There may be stuff along the way that I might not know, but I'm usually very upfront about that. Or if someone has a larger project and there's a piece of it that isn't my area of expertise, the first thing I would say is, I'm great at these 3 things. I don't do this other thing, but I know someone who does, and we've worked together before, or I would be happy to help you find somebody else for that piece. Like, I will always be open and upfront. So yeah, there might be sometimes there's a question or two that might give someone pause, but if they're really struggling to answer this stuff, I would run in the other direction. If the price seems too good to be true, this is true of many things in life, it probably is too good to be true. So just bear that in mind. If you're working with someone who uses proprietary tools or software, and I mentioned this, and it is going to require that you always go back to them if you need small updates or changes in the future, I wouldn't work with that person, because generally what that tends to mean is if you don't like the way things are going, you can't just walk away and hire somebody else. It means you're going to have to rebuild or start something from scratch. And most of us are working with like open source, another developer, designer, anyone could jump in and take it over. It might be a bit of a mess, but it doesn't mean somebody couldn't take it over. If someone is using something and they absolutely require that they do the updates, huge red flag. Because most of us, it's either a shady business practice, or from a technology standpoint, they're not using something that's pretty standard and that most of us would use. If they aren't willing to answer questions and help give you a little bit of education and training along the way as they complete their work, that would also be a red flag to me. It's if someone's got a bit of a complex and they make you feel stupid at any point and aren't willing to sort of share knowledge and make you feel more informed and a part of this whole thing, especially if you really, really want that, then I would worry that, once again, they're probably someone that just wants to force you to come back to them all the time and will charge you outrageous rates to do it. Just as an example, I worked with someone who's actually a friend of mine, but she's a jazz musician, and her website was just a WordPress site, and it was someone who did a lot of other musician sites, so they were recommended to her. But she just asked me if I would take a look at the site because she wanted to do some simple updates, and she was just getting frustrated because this person would charge her $100 no matter whether it was 5 minutes of work or an hour of work. And sometimes it was literally just changing 2 sentences on the website. So she always had to save up a whole bunch of work and then go to her. But it meant that she couldn't update her website on an ongoing basis. Then she gave me the login, and I logged into the back end, and I don't even know what this person had done. Like, it was never built in a way that, most websites, anyone can learn how to update them, add copy, put a blog post up. This person had built it so that it was all, like, messy code, and she would have to insert things into the code. It was a disaster. So in the end, we ended up just working together, and I set her up a new site using a WordPress theme. I've taught her how to do everything. Every now and then she messes something up and she'll send me a note on Messenger being like, oh my gosh, I deleted the wrong thing. And I'll just go in and help, track my time sometimes not. But like, that's the kind of thing that if someone throughout when they're explaining their process, if they're talking like this, that they'll be ready and they can do all the updates for you and all of that, I would just be a bit wary. Because it was really expensive for her as well, and now she just does everything on her own. Totally loves her site, and when we need to give it a facelift, then she'll come back to me, and that's great for everyone. So yeah, just be really aware of these kinds of things. And what I'll say overall is just, if you have concerns with any specific professional as you're going through this process, and, you've got some to choose from, even if you don't, there are others out there, I promise. But if your kind of spidey sense is tingling and you don't feel comfortable and you just don't feel like you're getting the information and the answers that you want, maybe the references aren't like all glowing, it's likely not going to get better when you're actually working with them. So I wouldn't choose them from day one. Like, I promise you, even if the search, you have to go out and search some more, there's lots of us out there. You can find someone who is honest and smart and good at what they do. So if you have concerns along the way, walk away. That honestly is my ultimate advice. So question here. When you've teamed up with a subcontractor because of a skill set that they have, do you take the lead in terms of communications with the client, or does the subcontractor deal directly with the client? What should the business owner expect? So the way that I tend to work is that I will handle all communication, just so that it keeps it clean. There's one person running the project. I will work with the subcontractor and let them just do what they're good at, and I'll handle all the project management and the pieces that I'm good at. So that's generally how I tend to work. However, I have had projects where if I'm working with a developer, sometimes we want to hash out something unique, or there's something that's a little more complex, or we want to talk through potential future uses on a website. So sometimes I will bring them into the mix. Normally, that doesn't mean that they start jumping in and it gets all confusing in terms of project management. But what I'll do is I'll invite them to meetings or the training session at the end where it makes sense. And then sometimes the one thing I can tell you is that one of the developers I work with also manages people's hosting for them and does all the ongoing maintenance and updates. So that's when I kind of hand it off to them at the end, once the website's built, and say, okay, now for all of this technical stuff, you'll know that if your site goes down or something funky is happening, that you've got Alex to handle all the technical stuff. So usually if there is some sort of handoff when things are done, that's a very clear communication. Like I have clients who reworked on a website for them 2 years ago, and if every now and then they'll get like an update or something, and they'll just say, just sending this to both of you, making sure everything's okay. Usually it's not even me anymore, it's Alex, but we just kind of go hand in hand at that point. But everyone's always clear. They always know exactly who they're dealing with, and during the initial project phase, that is like 99% of the time, it's only me. So hopefully that helps answer it. It should usually be on both sides. My ideal scenario is that both digital services professional and client have one point of contact throughout the whole project. That keeps things as clean and streamlined as possible. Now, I just want to make sure, there's only a few minutes left, but I definitely want to get through this because apparently this is something that is happening a lot and it hurts my heart. Super shady. So I know there's a lot, and through Digital Main Street, there's actually grants available for Main Street businesses who are looking to kind of turn their businesses digital. So apparently there's been some unscrupulous characters out there who are actually looking to kind of channel that grant money or asking direct access to grant money. Just want to flag that you should never, ever, ever, just like setting up things like social accounts or hosting accounts or domains, you should never, ever let anyone else do this stuff for you. So all of it, like you should have ownership. Same thing with grant money. Oh my goodness, that should only ever come to you. You should receive it. You should have it, and then use that to, when your digital services professional sends you an invoice, then you use that money to pay them. So please, like, no one that is above board would ever ask you to kind of circumvent that process. You would just say, hey, I got this digital grant, and be like, okay, great. So now I know you've got some budget to work with. That's awesome, but I'm never going to come to you to be like, well, let me try and sign up for, or let me, receive that on your behalf. None of that stuff. None of that is above board. It's not normal. Obviously, never share banking information. Like I said, don't let them try and receive that on your behalf. They also shouldn't apply for any of this on your behalf. It should always be you. It doesn't mean you couldn't potentially get some advice from someone on, how to fill this out or whatever, but it should always be you. I would also never pay in advance to someone unless you have a signed contract and you verified they're legitimate, you've done all your due diligence. So a lot of us as digital services professionals will ask for at least a small upfront payment because we also potentially might have been burned in the past, but that would be clearly documented. Everyone would know. You would have asked all the questions. You would have called references. At that point, you should feel confident if you're going to pay anything up front. And normally there's some negotiation to be had there, right? So sometimes, depending on the project, I would ask for 50% up front and 50% upon completion. And that's protection for the digital services professional too, because sometimes people skip out on bills, which is awful. But there could be negotiation there, right? So if you don't feel comfortable paying 50% upfront, then I would say, okay, let's break it into 4 and let's do 25, 25, 25, 25, or something like that. So there's usually, and anyone that once again is legitimate would be willing to have that conversation and would understand your hesitation potentially as well, right? So yeah, just know that if any of this is feeling shady, especially around terms of payment and all of that, once again, just run away. And as with anything else, if there's any doubts in your mind, consult with a lawyer before doing anything. Just make sure if anything feels weird or off or doesn't feel like this is the right way to do business, it's worth getting a lawyer involved before you head down the wrong path. So that's everything. We've gotten through all the things. Hopefully I answered a ton of questions without you guys having to ask a ton of questions. Like I said, pretty passionate about this. I wish that all digital services professionals were awesome and not shady, but sometimes, unfortunately, they are. So hopefully things like those red flags really helped. Once again, you can always go back to the PDF download and just refer back to all of those questions and everything I've shared there. Also, just want to let you know there's lots more upcoming online webinars. Sorry, this is clearly the slide's a little old. There's no in-person ones right now. But you can go visit the OBIAA website and just see what's coming up. There's lots of different topics, and there's some other new ones, just like this topic this evening was new as well. And basically, that's it. So just want to say thank you to everyone. Hopefully that was helpful, and you feel a little bit more confident when you go out there and potentially hire someone to work with. So have a great night and a great rest of your week. Thanks so much.